and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight Sessions. My name is Ilan Fisher, the host, and I also head up our non-profit partnerships here at accessiBe's. Today's going to be really interesting because I'm having a conversation with Heather Grantham. She is the Executive Director of CID, the Central Institute for the Deaf. How's it going, Heather?
Oh, it's going great. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. We're really excited to, first of all, have you on the Spotlight Sessions, not only for the work you do, but the work that you've done. So for those of us who haven't gotten to know you that well, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and your personal journey so far?
Sure. So I'm the Executive Director of CID, and CID is the kind of place that's been around for over a century. So it's a St. Louis, Missouri institution, and so we're located right in the Midwest. And I'm from St. Louis, and way back after college, I needed a job, and I happened to find a job at this place called CID, Central Institute for the Deaf. Now, mind you, I have a background in art history. That was my degree was. So I wanted to work in a museum, and I wanted to be around art. And I just kind of fell into this job. And at the time, it was the mid-1990s, this was a place that had a residential program where people from all over the country would send their children, in fact, all over the world, would send their children to St. Louis, Missouri to be educated at CID. And they needed a place to live. So I got a job as a dorm parent. At the whopping age of 21, I was responsible for taking care of 5 or 6, maybe 7 boys with who were deaf, profoundly deaf, and who were attending CID. And I quickly found myself falling in love with the concept of working with children with hearing loss, and so instantly changed my career trajectory. Went to graduate school to become a teacher of the deaf, taught at a local school here in St. Louis, and then realized that I really wanted to know more about the way that the brain processed sound and the role of speech perception and language in literacy development for children with hearing loss. So I left the classroom and I went to get my PhD in cognitive psychology with a focus on language and literacy development, particularly for children who wear devices called cochlear implants. So I did my PhD and did some research, and then really wanted to train teachers to work in classrooms like the ones that I had worked in. So I was the director of a graduate program at Washington University in St. Louis for 12 years, and then realized I really wanted to get back to the place that had started it all 25 years ago, and so I became the executive director of CID earlier this year.
Wow. Do you often think of what would have happened had you not, in your first job, worked at CID?
Often. And it has, my work feels so much a part of my everyday, and I feel so fortunate to be able to do something that I love very, very much every single day. I don't feel like I've lost any energy over the last 25 years. And I suspect that if I was in a museum, that I would have really missed out on all of these voices I hear down the hall that are, running down the hall right now, little children in the building who are learning and growing their brains every day. And there's something incredibly fulfilling about this work that I just couldn't pass up.
I love that answer. And really, in your day-to-day as the executive director, what does that look like? It must be super broad, and also must have changed a lot since you first walked through the doors 20 years ago. And also, how was that mindset shift to come in, kind of the bottom of the ladder to quote unquote top of the ladder?
Absolutely. Like I'm in a beautiful office right now, looking out the window at the dorm where I used to live with these boys. And we don't have a residential program anymore, of course, and very, very few schools do. But that just is indicative of the change. It used to be 25 years ago that children who were deaf had very few educational options for, especially for those who wanted to learn how to talk. So that's another important piece of my role, is making sure that people understand that our educational programming is about teaching children to learn to listen through hearing aids and cochlear implants. It's all about early intervention. It's about providing access. It's a really important piece, access to spoken language and sound. And so way back when, 25 years ago, when I lived across the street in the dorm, in order to wake the boys up in the morning to get them to go to breakfast, I'd flash the lights, I'd shake their beds. They would have vibrating bed alarms that would help them wake up in the morning, because their devices weren't as good at helping them perceive sound. Now, I have children who are Bluetoothing, or not Bluetoothing, but I have children who are using Bluetooth on their hearing aids to listen to music on their phones. I FaceTime with kids. I can interact. We've got graduate students in our building who are bilateral cochlear implant wearers who are learning to be teachers of the deaf to teach other children how to talk who are deaf. And so that 25 years ago, that would never have happened. We were still stomping on the floor to get kids' attention, tapping them on the shoulder. Now that we use our voices and they use theirs.
That's phenomenal, and must feel like a real full circle moment for you as well.
Absolutely.
And really, like, I'll be honest and transparent here. I don't know a lot about the deaf community. What are some of the misconceptions, or really, I don't like the word greatest myths because it seems to lessen the point. But really, what are some of the common misconceptions about the deaf community that people don't know about or don't think about?
Well, probably one of the most important things that your audience should know is that 95% of babies who are born with hearing loss are born to hearing parents. Only 5% of babies who are born deaf are born to deaf parents. So the reasons behind a child having hearing loss are variable and really all over the map. But it's really important to realize that a parent may go to the hospital, have a baby, and the baby is screened for hearing loss and be absolutely shocked to get the news or the diagnosis because that parent doesn't have hearing loss. And so it's a moment of intense grief and fear and anxiety because it's not something that a parent ever thinks about. They're aware about other types of disabilities that may be present at birth, but deafness is rarely something that's on a parent's mind. And in fact, it's a low incidence disability. Only about 1 in 1,000 children who are born have pediatric hearing loss. So that's probably one of the most important things to kind of start out with, because if you think about one of the things that most people think about when they think about deafness, especially with children, is that those children may know sign language, or American Sign Language, or British or French Sign Language. And in fact, because most deaf children are born into hearing families, very few deaf children end up learning American Sign Language because their family doesn't know sign language. And instead, the family has a desire for the child to learn their family's language. And so at CID, we are specialists in teaching children how to use spoken language. We aren't specialists in how to use sign language. We have many other colleagues around the country and in St. Louis who we rely on to be those specialists for us. So when a family comes in and wants a child to learn sign language, we can give them great references. But most families really want their children to use the language of their family, whether it's spoken English, spoken Spanish, whatever it is. And it's our responsibility to let the parents guide us. And so that might be one of the misconceptions about the deaf community, is that everybody knows sign language, when in fact it's really a small proportion. And our children who go to our school and who learn how to listen and talk often learn sign language later as a way to connect with other deaf people who know sign language. But for the most part, we find that that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that just because a child has a hearing loss doesn't mean that it's an absolute that the child will know sign language.
That's a really insightful answer, because it kind of, in my mind, got me thinking, is like when we have kind of assumed accommodations that you would give to someone. So it's not putting, the thinking of, oh, if somebody is deaf, then you have to straight away give sign language, but you have to really have that conversation and understand what their accessibility requirements are. And that kind of, yeah.
And it's very, I just to piggyback on that, one of the things that I'm very conscious of is, for example, we were just talking about our graduation ceremony that will be coming up here at CID in a few months. And CID doesn't have older children. We have children ages birth through 12. So when a child graduates from CID, they might be 4 years old. And so we have a ceremony every year. And we were talking yesterday among our staff about making sure that we have appropriate accommodations for the ceremony. And one of the things that we always ensure is that we have an American Sign Language interpreter for anyone in the audience for whom ASL is their most direct language. But then we also are going to have a CART writer, so real-time captioner, who is going to be providing services that will have the streamed transcript on the screen. And that's for somebody who might be deaf, but for whom ASL isn't their first language. So that's an accommodation that reaches those folks who are deaf. And we've got a different accommodation that reaches somebody who uses a different language. So we're always thinking about that. And it's really important to distinguish between the two, that just because somebody wears a hearing aid or a cochlear implant does not mean that their best accommodation is going to be an ASL interpreter.
And I really like that, and you kind of got me thinking about what I wanted to ask next, which is what happens to the students after they graduate CID, and also what are some of the tips that you give to either businesses or organizations or other schools that are kind of taking on the task of teaching these children? What's kind of the advice that you give to them in terms of providing accommodations?
So our children, when they leave CID, the goal is for them to go back to their local neighborhood school. So the goal is always come to CID early. We'll get intensive intervention. The largest part of our program is actually birth to 3. And we want intensive intervention, and then we want you to go back to your local school. The goal is not to be in what we call kind of a most restrictive environment. According to special education law, the goal is really an inclusive environment. And so when a child goes back into their local school, they're armed with self-advocacy skills. We work really, really hard on that here. Even our 3-year-olds, they have to tell us when their batteries are dead. They have to raise their hand when they need something or when they can't understand a teacher. We know that's really hard in a general mainstream environment, so we make sure that our students practice things like making phone calls and asking someone to clarify what they said, or telling their teacher that the device they're using isn't working. It's not an easy thing to do when you're 6. It's definitely not easy when you're a teenager, and so we try to arm them with those skills. We also, though, go into the schools and we do what we call an in-service, and we tell educators who may have never seen a cochlear implant before, they may have never seen a hearing aid on a 2nd grader, and we tell those teachers about things that can help the child's listening environment. For example, a lot of schools have hard walls and hard floors. Some schools don't even have walls. Some just have like curtains that they pull across for classrooms. We talk to teachers about things like putting tennis balls on the end of their chairs to minimize the squeaking that can happen when the chair pulls across the room, putting rugs on the floor, hanging soft things on the walls, making sure that they're always wearing an DM system, which broadcasts their voice directly to the child's device. It helps minimize noise. So those are simple accommodations, but then we also, of course, have lots of formal accommodations put into place. And those are just kind of generally, it's things like make sure that you have the person's attention before you start talking. As teachers roam around the room, or even like in a business meeting, if a business person is in a meeting, make sure you have the person's attention, and always take the opportunity to put captions on the screen. Nowadays, every device has the opportunity to have live captions, and all videos should be captured, of course. And I personally like to use PowerPoint because it has some built-in captioning features, things like that.
Awesome. And I'm really learning a lot just from you speaking. And Heather, just really the last thing I wanted to ask was if other organizations or people in the community want to work with CID, collaborate with CID, and learn more, how can they reach you?
Absolutely. So we have a wonderful website. It's cid.edu. If you go there, you can see lots about our children. We have some fantastic videos. If you've never heard a child with severe hearing loss learning how to talk, our videos will be really, really eye-popping, I think. And so I encourage everyone to come and visit.
Amazing. Heather, again, I really wanted to thank you. As I said earlier, it's a topic that I don't know enough about, but really thank you for being the person who's really so articulating in getting the message out and for all the work that you do. And I look forward to our next conversation.